Hello from the Channel Studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the programme that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Uyitayo. On the programme this week, it's all about election results, from Mexico electing its first female president to both the ruling parties in India and South Africa faced with a new political landscape after losing majority. For the first time in the 200-year history of Mexico's republic, a woman has been elected president after an election period marred by violence. Ruling party candidate Claudia Sheinbaum emerged as the victor with about 60% of the vote. In a speech following the election, she promised to govern for all and to be an investor-friendly president.
Huge crowds waving campaign banners and flags gathered in Mexico City to welcome the country's new leader, Claudia Sheinbaum. In a landslide victory, the 61-year-old Nobel Prize-winning climate scientist and former mayor of the capital won Mexico's general election. For the first time in 200 years, a woman has reached the presidency of the republic, a major step for Mexico, a country with one of the highest rates of femicide and home to the world's second biggest Roman Catholic population, which for years pushed more traditional values and roles for women.
I didn't get here on my own. We all got here together. Our female heroes who created the nation, our female ancestors, our mothers, our daughters and our granddaughters. I congratulate all Mexicans because today, with their participation, showed that Mexico is a democratic country with peaceful elections with a high participation.
Muchas gracias. ¡Que viva México! ¡Viva México! ¡Viva México!
Mexico's official electoral authority gave Sheinbaum as much as 60% of the vote in the election, a 30% lead over opposition candidate Xochitl Gálvez. It's the most support won by a Mexican presidential election candidate since the end of one-party rule in the year 2000. Around 100 million people were registered to vote.
I'm very happy, very proud, knowing that a woman is going to represent us. So the world knows that Mexican women are hardworking people, capable of becoming high-rank officials at an international level.
However, the election campaign was marked by unprecedented levels of violence, often carried out by organised crime gangs. About 38 local candidates were reportedly murdered during the campaign, reinforcing massive security problems the country faces, and 2 people were killed at polling stations in Puebla state. Sheinbaum, who had the support of the outgoing president, has promised to reduce the violence and improve the lives of women in the country. Her main opponent conceded defeat with around 26 to 28% of the vote, according to preliminary results.
I
have always been a Democrat, firmly committed to respecting the law. I have shown this as a citizen and throughout my political life, which is why I've recognized the results. Without a doubt, it's a historical milestone that Mexico will have its first female president. This is part of the important advances on gender equality that we have achieved.
The election has widely been described as a sea change for women in Mexico. How to tackle Mexico's violent cartels is going to be one of many challenges facing Sheinbaum when she takes up office on October the 1st. She has said that it is important to tackle what she says are the roots of the violence and has promised to invest in welfare programs to prevent poor young Mexicans from being recruited by criminal gangs.
Over in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has won a third consecutive term, but his party failed to secure a majority on its own for the first time in 10 years. The results are a personal blow to the Prime Minister, who has always secured majorities in elections. The world's biggest election was held in 7 phases over 6 weeks, with almost 1 billion people registered to vote. Victory celebrations at the BJP headquarters in New Delhi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is returning to power for a record third term. The victory is, however, bittersweet. His Bharatiya Janata Party has lost its outright parliamentary majority for the first time in 10 years. Nonetheless, together with its political allies, known as the National Democratic Alliance, its win amounts to 293 seats, which is enough to form a majority government to rule for the next 5 years and return the Prime Minister to office for a third term. Modi thanked voters for their mandate and said he would do everything to eradicate corruption and poverty.
On this glorious day, the National Democratic Alliance is going to form the government for the third time consecutively. We are grateful to the people. This is a victory for the world's largest democracy. This is a win of the country's loyalty to the Constitution, a win for India's 1.4 billion people.
The opposition coalition, India Opposition Alliance, performed far better than expected, securing 232 seats. These numbers contrast sharply with 2019 results when the BJP-led National Democratic Alliance won 353 seats, 303 of which were bagged by the BJP alone. Despite the blow, most party supporters are happy with the outcome.
The Prime Minister worked very hard, and all the BJP cadres are in high spirit. With the kind of work Modi has done, we are confident that we will win this election. We should agree that it is all because of what Modi has done. He has done a lot of work, so we are confident we will get 370 seats.
Since assuming power in 2014, Modi has attained levels of popularity not seen in decades, owing to a raft of development and welfare programs. Modi's leadership, the country of 1.4 billion people, has become the world's fastest-growing major economy and a modern global power, making strides in technology and space. Yet, despite these successes, poverty and youth unemployment persist, particularly in rural areas, and the wealth gap has widened. The Election Commission says more than 640 million people voted in the poll held in 7 phases over 6 weeks. But some 969 million citizens were eligible to vote this year in the world's largest democratic exercise ever. Meanwhile, as voting wrapped up, extreme heat killed at least 77 people. Voters and election workers have endured an extended period of extreme heat since polls opened on April the 19th. A part of the capital of Delhi recorded the country's highest ever temperature of 49.9 degrees Celsius on Tuesday last week. The country often experiences heat waves during the summer months of May and June, but in recent years they've arrived earlier and become more prolonged. Experts say the climate crisis is only going to cause more frequent and longer heat waves in the future, testing India's ability to adapt. and to the elections in South Africa. After losing its 3-decade-old absolute majority, the ruling African National Congress is now holding talks with its political opponents about forming a coalition government. The Electoral Commission announced the polls were free and fair, but with no single party gaining an outright majority. The final results confirmed the ANC's decline in support to just more than 40% of the vote. Our South African correspondent, Innocent Samosa, has more.
A room full of worry, but also a room full of excitement for some, as political party leaders stand at the forefront, embodying the hopes and ambitions of their supporters. In contrast, the air is thick with tension and concern for others. Nervous glazes and hushed conversations reveal the uncertainty about what lies ahead as coalition talks and negotiations intensify behind closed doors. Chief Electoral Officer Saima Mabolo declared the elections free and fair.
Indeed, this was a theater of openness. As has been the case in the past 30 years, our democracy has spoken.
The future is uncertain. What happens next remains a question mark as parties strategize and maneuver for power.
Throughout the election campaign, parties and candidates have held fast to the fundamental principles of our Constitution and our democracy. Parties and candidates have affirmed the right of voters to participate in an election that is free, fair, and peaceful. And now we are all called upon to recognize that the results of the election in the end reflect the will of the people. What this election has made plain is that the people of South Africa expect their leaders to work together to meet their needs. They expect the parties for which they have voted to find common ground, to overcome their differences, to act and work together for the good of everyone.
Regarding the best coalition scenarios for South Africa, political analyst Lukona Mguni had this to say.
Very difficult to say because, political parties have to make two calculations. Which coalition is in the best interest for the country, but which coalition is also in the best interest for them as political parties. I think in so far as what is in the best interest of the country, if you think about the press briefing that the former President Jacob Zuma had last night here in this venue, where effectively Umkhonto weSizwe Party is disputing the entire election.
Meanwhile, political analyst Sanusha Naidu says it's difficult to determine which political party would be the best fit for South Africa.
I think that's the million-dollar bet right now. We don't know which one. I think, at this point in time, we don't have legislation that kind of defines what a coalition strategy or framework should look like. But at the same time, we're leaving it up to these political parties who have been in this kind of very, very competitive and combatant relationship. And I feel that somehow gets caught up more than what it is. I hope that sanity prevails, maturity prevails, and I hope they think of South Africans who voted and stood in the long queues as opposed to what their vested interests are.
The African National Congress is seeking a coalition partner. The EFF has stated that it can work with the ANC under 3 conditions: the resignation of President Cyril Ramaphosa, control of Finance Department portfolio, and the position of Speaker of the National Assembly. Meanwhile, for now, the Democratic Alliance aligns with the multi-party charter. It's clear that South Africa's political landscape is set for a significant change.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we take a look at the situation in Sudan as aid agencies warn famine is imminent in the country. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. Sudan, which is in its 2nd year of a raging conflict between rival military factions, is home to the largest number of internally displaced people in the world. Power fighting between two generals has dragged the country into civil war and turned the capital city into ground zero for one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Famine looms that officials warn could kill hundreds of thousands of children in the coming months. Sarah was 9 months pregnant when a bomb struck her home, forcing her to flee and deliver a baby alone.
We were living in East Khartoum. We never planned to leave. But when it started to get more challenging and the bombings became too much, we decided to finally leave. I was 9 months pregnant. I arrived here and gave birth the next day. Even now, we don't have anything.
Sarah and her children are sheltered at Al-Uri IDP gathering site in Gedaref, which hosts over 300 families. The International Organization for Migration estimates that the conflict has displaced nearly 58,000 people from El Fasher in North Darfur since April the 1st. Many more people, including children and elderly people, are unable or are being prevented from moving to safer areas. Hundreds of thousands of civilians in El Fasher are facing an increasingly dire humanitarian situation. Many parts of the city have been left without electricity or water. A growing proportion of the population has limited access to necessities and essential services, including food and healthcare.
UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk is horrified by the escalating violence in El Fasher in Darfur, where hostilities between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, backed by their respective allied armed groups, are having a deeply devastating toll on civilians. At least 58 civilians are reported to have been killed and 213 others injured in El Fasher since fighting dramatically escalated last week. And these figures are certainly an underestimate. We warn both commanders that fighting in El Fasher, where more than 1.8 million residents and internally displaced people are currently encircled and at imminent risk of famine, would have a catastrophic impact on civilians, and it would deepen intercommunal conflict with disastrous humanitarian consequences.
Some 18 million people in the country are already acutely hungry, and 5 million people are said to be on the brink of famine. Aid agencies warn that time is running out for millions of people because the country's warring parties are preventing aid from reaching them.
19 global humanitarian organizations, including 12 UN agencies, today warned that if they continue to be prevented from providing aid in Sudan rapidly and at scale, a famine will likely take hold in large parts of the country. More people will flee to neighboring countries. Children will succumb to disease and malnutrition. And women and girls will face even greater suffering and dangers. We have 18 million people who are acutely hungry. And as I mentioned, 3.6 million children who are acutely malnourished. And acute malnourishment is really dangerous in the sense that I think the number is that they are 10 to 11 times more likely to die than children who are not acutely malnourished.
Nearly 10 million people have been forced to leave their homes, both inside and outside the African country.
After more than a year of conflict, the people of Sudan are trapped in an inferno of brutal violence. Famine is closing in. Diseases are closing in. The fighting is closing in. And there's no end in sight. Khartoum, the beating heart of Sudan, has been decimated. No one and nothing has been spared. Horrific atrocities are being committed with reckless abandon. Reports of rape, torture, and ethnically motivated violence are streaming in. Indiscriminate attacks are killing civilians, including young children. Sudan is now today the world's largest displacement crisis.
Thousands of people have reportedly been killed since the military and the paramilitary rapid support forces began fighting in April last year. A military council has run the country since a coup in 2021, with ongoing tensions between Sudanese Army General Burhan and RSF leader General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo over the country's direction, the integration of the RSF into the army, and the planned transition to civilian rule. And over in Haiti, the situation there is also critical, especially for children. Aid agencies say 90% of the population live in poverty and millions of children remain in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. The country's healthcare system is all but collapsed amid gang violence, which forced the resignation of the country's prime minister, leaving citizens with little hope of medical attention.
Hundreds of mothers bring their children to this hospital in Port-au-Prince for screening and treatment of malnutrition. These families mainly come from areas controlled by armed groups and sometimes travel long distances because hospitals in their towns have been forced to close. The only hospitals still serving the population of Port-au-Prince are now overwhelmed due to the increasing demand for essential health and nutrition services, as well as a lack of human resources, equipment and adequate medicines.
The escalating violence in Port-au-Prince and Artibonite is plunging Haiti into a humanitarian disaster. Not only are children trapped, but so are the critical supplies that are meant to cure and nourish them.
Currently in the Haitian capital, 6 out of 10 hospitals are out of service and the rest face enormous challenges. Every hospital in the country has reported difficulties in acquiring and maintaining essential medical supplies, as international and domestic cargo flights from and to Port-au-Prince airports returned to be operational only recently, with limited capacity and a significant backlog, as did the main seaport, which was previously in the hands of armed groups.
The roads in and out of Port-au-Prince are controlled by armed groups. The port has been closed for a long time and was looted. And the airport was closed. So effectively, Port-au-Prince for the past few months has been an island. So it's really important for WFP and other humanitarians to be able to bring supplies into the city to run essential programs. So the essential services that people rely on, be it healthcare, water and sanitation, food, they require the free movement of goods and people. And right now we just haven't had that. So what we're doing with this flight is reopening that door and ensuring that vital supplies come in to allow these essential services to function.
About 4.4 million people in Haiti are in urgent need of food assistance, and 1.6 million people face emergency levels of acute food insecurity, which increases the risk of child wasting and malnutrition. The arrival of the rainy season is expected to worsen the situation, bringing a rise in cases of waterborne disease, as well as disease spread by mosquitoes such as malaria. The number of internally displaced persons, already exceeding 360,000, continues to rise.
Sometimes I'm very hungry, so I ask people for a bite when I see them eating, but they humiliate me. I've never had to beg in my life. I always manage to run my business. It really hurts. I had my work before, but the gangs forced me out. And now I'm living in this situation that makes me cry. I'm here in this camp for displaced people. Now I have nothing.
Chronic instability, dictatorships and natural disasters in recent decades have left Haiti the poorest nation in the Americas. Gangs have taken over much of the country, bringing violence and destruction to the capital in the wake of the assassination of President Jovenel Moise in July 2021. According to UNICEF, 2.7 million people live in areas under effective gang control, with many of the country's children increasingly forced to join. A Kenyan-led mission authorized by the United Nations Security Council in October 2023 is expected to be deployed soon. Its mandate is to assist Haitian police in securing key infrastructure and dealing with criminal groups behind the violence and chaos.
And that's the programme today, but remember our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. Bye for now.